December 24th, 1944, 1900 hours, Camp Hearne, Texas. Captain James Murphy stood outside Barracks 7, watching his breath fog in the unusually cold air. Inside, 12 German prisoners of war had been working in secret for 3 weeks. Tonight they'd invited him to see what they'd built from nothing but scrap lumber, tin cans, and wire salvaged from the camp's garbage. Murphy had supervised POW camps for 18 months. He'd seen men broken by defeat, consumed by bitterness, hardened by captivity. He expected crude drawings, maybe a few carved figures, prison crafts to pass the time. What he found instead would crack something open in his chest that he thought the war had sealed shut forever. By midnight, 14 American guards would stand in that barracks, tears streaming down their faces, reminded that somewhere beneath the uniforms and languages and the machinery of war, humanity still breathed. This is the story of how enemies became brothers for one night. Obergefreiter Hans Weber had built his first nativity scene at age 7 in Obergefreiter, Bavaria, where his father carved religious figures for tourists visiting the famous Passion play. Hans inherited the talent but not the patience for religious theater. He preferred practical carpentry, barns, furniture, window frames, things people could use. The war found him in 1939 at age 28, married 2 years, with a daughter he'd held for 3 days before his infantry regiment deployed to Poland. He'd carried a photograph of Maria and little Greta through France, through Russia, through the long retreat back to Normandy. The photograph survived. Hans survived. His faith in why any of it mattered did not. He surrendered to the American 2nd Infantry Division on June 12, 1944, 3 miles inland from Omaha Beach. The Americans fed him better than the Wehrmacht had in 6 months. They shipped him to England, then to New York, then by train across America to Texas, where cotton fields stretched to horizons that made Russia look small. Camp Hearne opened in 1942, to house German and Italian POWs captured in North Africa and Europe. By late 1944, it held over 4,000 Germans. The Geneva Convention required humane treatment, adequate food, medical care, male privileges, recreational activities. The Americans complied meticulously. Hans arrived in August. He was assigned to the camp carpentry shop, repairing barracks, building furniture. The Americans provided tools. The work kept his hands busy. It did not keep his mind from counting days until he might see his daughter again, if she still lived, if Germany still stood, if anything he'd believed in remained when the war finally ended. November 1944. The war news filtering into Camp Hearne told a story the prisoners couldn't ignore. Germany was losing. The Russian front had collapsed. Allied armies pushed toward the Rhine. American bombers turned German cities to ash. In the camp, morale fractured along predictable lines. Hardcore Nazis formed their own groups, enforcing party discipline, threatening anyone who cooperated too enthusiastically with captors. Most POWs fell into a gray middle. Not fanatics, not traitors, just men waiting for the war to end so they could go home to whatever remained. Hans watched men in his barracks deteriorate. Willy Hoffman, a metal worker from Essen, stopped speaking entirely after mail from home arrived with news that British bombers had killed his parents and 2 sisters. Ernst Keller, barely 20 years old, carved notches into his bunk frame, one for each day of captivity, as if keeping score against time itself. The Americans provided work details, sports leagues, educational classes. The International Red Cross delivered books, musical instruments, art supplies. None of it addressed the fundamental problem. These were men who'd built their identities around purpose, duty, belonging to something larger than themselves. Captivity stripped all that away, leaving them suspended in a limbo where nothing they did mattered beyond filling hours until fate decided their futures. Captain James Murphy noticed. He'd commanded the guard company since Camp Hearne opened. Before the war, he taught high school history in Pennsylvania, where he'd learned that young men needed to build something, create something, leave some mark proving they'd existed. Idle hands invited trouble, escape attempts, violence, despair. On November 27th, Murphy posted a notice. POWs could submit proposals for Christmas projects. The camp would provide materials within reason. Best project would receive extra privileges, extended recreation hours, additional meal allowances. The hardcore Nazis boycotted it. They called it collaboration, weakness, betrayal of the Reich. They pressured others to refuse. We're soldiers, not craftsmen making decorations for our captors. Hans Weber read the notice and remembered his daughter. Greta would be 7 now. In Bavaria, families gathered on Christmas Eve to light candles around nativity scenes, singing Stille Nacht before midnight mass. Maria would take Greta to church alone this year, if the church still stood, if they still lived. That night, Hans made a decision. If he couldn't be home for Christmas, he would bring Christmas into this Texas prison. Not for the Americans, not even for Germany. For 12 men in Barracks 7 who needed to remember they were craftsmen, artists, fathers, not just prisoners waiting to die or go home. November 28th, after dinner, Hans gathered 11 men in the corner of Barracks 7, away from the hardcore Nazis who monitored collaboration. He spoke quietly in German. I'm building a nativity scene, full scale. 20 figures, 6 feet tall, detailed enough that you'd swear they could breathe. I need metal workers, painters, anyone with steady hands. Silence. Then Willie Hoffman, the metal worker who hadn't spoken in weeks, looked up from his bunk. What materials? Scrap lumber from the carpentry shop, tin cans from the mess hall, wire, nails, whatever we can salvage. The Americans throw away more in a week than we had in 6 months on the Russian front. Ernst Keller, the boy who carved notches, asked the question everyone was thinking. Why? What's the point? Hans pulled out his photograph. Maria and Greta, taken at Christmas 1938, standing beside the nativity scene in Obergefreiter main square. My daughter will light candles this Christmas. I can't be there. But I can build something beautiful, something that reminds us we're still human beings who can create, not just destroy. Friedrich Müller, a former art teacher from Munich, leaned forward. The Nazis will call us traitors. The Nazis can rot in hell. Hans's voice hardened. I didn't survive 4 years of war to spend Christmas carving notches into wood and pretending I'm still fighting. We lost. The war's over for us. All we have left is who we choose to be in this camp until we go home. He laid out his vision, a traditional Bavarian nativity scene, but built from the detritus of captivity. Tin can halos, wire for angel wings, scrap wood carved into shepherds and wise men, paint mixed from whatever pigments they could create or salvage. We work after lights out, Hans explained. The Americans won't interfere with a Christmas project, but the fewer Nazis who know the better. 3 weeks. We'll finish on Christmas Eve. Klaus Richter, a stonemason, grinned for the first time in months. I can shape figures from scrap plaster. We've got broken wall sections from repairs. Franz Becker, who'd worked in his family's paint shop before the war. I can mix colors from clay, rust, soot. Won't be perfect, but it'll work. One by one, they agreed. 12 men, ages 19 to 43, Catholics, Protestants, one who claimed no faith at all. What united them wasn't religion. It was the need to build something beautiful in a place designed to contain defeated enemies. Hans submitted the proposal to Captain Murphy the next morning. Murphy read it, looked at Hans's photograph of his daughter, and approved it without hesitation. You'll have access to the carpentry shop after work hours. I'll tell the guards to leave you alone. He didn't ask why. He understood. November 29th, 1944. The first night of construction. Hans and his 11 volunteers gathered in the carpentry shop at 2100 hours, after the camp settled into evening routine. Captain Murphy had arranged for a guard to unlock the shop and keep watch from a distance, close enough to maintain security, far enough to give the Germans privacy. Hans spread his sketches across a workbench. The Virgin Mary, Infant Jesus, Joseph, 3 wise men, 4 shepherds, an angel, animals. 20 figures total, ranging from 18 inches, the lamb, to 6 feet, the angel. "We start with the frame," Hans explained, selecting lumber from the scrap pile. "The Americans waste wood like we wasted lives in Russia. Look at this, oak, barely scratched. We'll build a stable frame first, then the figures." Willie Hoffman examined tin cans from the mess hall, Campbell's soup, Del Monte vegetables, Folger's coffee. American abundance made manifest in garbage. He began cutting the metal into strips for halos, using tools from the machine shop where he repaired camp equipment. Klaus Richter mixed plaster from broken wall sections. Water and dust swept from the carpentry shop floor. The mixture wouldn't match commercial plaster, but it would harden into workable material for faces and hands. Franz Becker experimented with pigments. Red clay from the camp yard mixed with water for flesh tones. Soot from the mess hall stove for black. Rust scraped from metal fixtures for brown and orange. He tested them on scrap wood, adjusting proportions until colors emerged that wouldn't embarrass a Bavarian carpenter. Ernst Keller, the youngest, took the simplest task, sanding wood. Each piece of scrap lumber carried splinters, rough edges, stains from its previous purpose. Ernst transformed them, his hands finding rhythm in repetitive work that required no decisions, just steady patience. Friedrich Müller, the art teacher, sketched faces. He taught portraiture in Munich before the war, when art meant capturing human dignity, not propaganda posters glorifying death. Now, in a Texas POW camp, he drew the Virgin Mary with his wife's eyes, Joseph with his own father's weathered hands, shepherds with the faces of men he'd known in his infantry company. "Not too perfect," Hans warned as Friedrich refined Mary's features. "We're working with scrap. The imperfection is part of the truth. We're broken men building something beautiful from broken materials." They worked until midnight, when camp regulations required lights out. The first night yielded the stable frame, a rough A-frame structure 4 feet wide, 6 feet tall, open on one side. It didn't look like much yet, just scrap wood held together with salvaged nails and wire. But it was a beginning. Something created, not destroyed. As they returned to their barracks, passing under guard towers where American soldiers watched with rifles, Hans felt something he hadn't felt since surrendering 6 months earlier. Purpose. His hands had built something. Tomorrow, they'd build more. Week 1, December 1 through 7th, 1944. December 1st, Night 1. The Virgin Mary took shape first. Hans carved her from a single piece of oak plank, working grain patterns into the folds of her robe. His hands remembered the movements from childhood, watching his father transform wood into figures that tourists paid good money to place beneath their Christmas trees. Friedrich Müller refined the face. Young, perhaps 16, eyes downcast toward the infant she would hold. Not idealized like propaganda, not stern like the portraits in Munich museums. Just a girl, tired and wondering how she'd ended up in a stable. "She looks like my sister," Willie Hoffman said, breaking his weeks of silence. His voice cracked. "Anna, she'd be 16 now if—" He didn't finish. They all knew. If British bombers hadn't turned Essen into rubble. December 2nd. Joseph emerged from pine, cheaper wood, but Hans made it work. He carved the figure bent slightly forward, one hand reaching toward Mary, protective. Friedrich painted Joseph's face older, weathered, a workman's face marked by sun and labor. Klaus Richter molded the infant Jesus from plaster, working on a scale that matched Hans's plans. 8 inches long, swaddled in cloth that Ernst Keller cut from old rags donated by the camp supply officer. Strange, Klaus mused, smoothing plaster into the shape of a baby's face. My son was born 3 days before I deployed. I held him once. Now I'm making a plaster baby in Texas while my real son grows up in Germany without knowing his father's face. December 3rd, 4th. The wise men required detail. Crowns fashioned from tin cans that Willie cut and shaped with metalworking tools from the camp machine shop. He bent the metal into elaborate points, attached them to wooden bases with wire. Franz mixed gold paint from yellow clay and mica he found in the camp yard, creating a shimmering effect that caught lamplight. Hans carved the 3 figures with distinct personalities, one old and wise, one young and earnest, one middle-aged and skeptical. Friedrich painted their faces from memory. The old one looked like his university professor, the young one like a student who died in France, the skeptical one like himself staring into a mirror. December 5th. The angel proved most challenging. Hans carved it 6 feet tall, the centerpiece, the figure announcing peace and goodwill. Willie crafted wings from wire and aluminum can metal, bending the material into feathered patterns that caught light like real wings might have. The face required 3 attempts. First version, too stern, militant, a propaganda poster angel declaring victory. Hans scrapped it. Second version, too sweet, sentimental, a greeting card. Friedrich rejected it. Third version, neither triumph nor sentiment, just otherworldly beauty announcing something incomprehensible to mortals, an alien presence in human form. That's the one, Friedrich confirmed. Angels should terrify and comfort simultaneously. December 6th. 4 shepherds, carved from various scrap woods, pine, oak, cedar. Hans gave each one a different pose, one kneeling, one standing with staff, one shielding eyes against celestial light, one cradling a lamb. Ernst Keller carved the lamb itself, a small figure, barely 10 inches long but detailed with wool texture created by scoring the wood with a nail. He worked slowly, carefully, losing himself in the repetitive patterns. December 7th. Animals, oxen and donkeys. Hans simplified these, solid forms without the facial detail of human figures. Franz painted them brown and gray, adding shadows that gave them dimension. By the end of week 1, all 20 figures existed in rough form. Not finished, faces needed refining, paint needed additional coats, details required attention, but the nativity scene had substance. It was becoming real. Captain Murphy visited the carpentry shop on December 7th evening. He stood at the doorway, watching 12 German POWs transform scrap into art. He said nothing. Hans glanced up, met his eyes, saw something unexpected, respect. Murphy nodded and left. The next morning, additional scrap lumber appeared in the carpentry shop, along with better quality paint salvaged from camp maintenance supplies. Week 2, December 8th through 14th, 1944. December 8th. Detail work began. Friedrich painted faces with brushes he'd made from his own hair tied to wire. The Virgin Mary's eyes, soft, brown, questioning. Joseph's hands, calloused, strong, gentle. The wise men's robes, purple, crimson, gold, colors mixed from clay, rust, and imagination. In Munich, Friedrich said as he worked, I taught students that art reveals truth propaganda obscures. I taught them to paint what they saw, not what authorities demanded they see. Then the Nazis came, and suddenly every painting had to glorify the Reich. He dipped his brush into paint mixed from Texas clay.
This nativity scene, this is the truest thing I've painted in 6 years.
December 9th, 10th. Willie Hoffman spent 2 nights perfecting halos.
He cut tin can metal into circular discs,
then scored intricate patterns using tools he'd sharpened to precision. The patterns caught light, creating the illusion of radiance.
"My daughters love the Christmas angel we hung in our living room," he told Hans.
Ingrid, the youngest, would stare at it for hours. She believed angels watched over her. His voice dropped. "I received a letter last week.
Red Cross finally traced my family.
Ingrid died in the firebombing. She was 6 years old." Hans stopped carving. "I'm sorry, Willie." "Don't be. I'm building her an angel. When I finish this halo, she'll have light around her head forever."
"The bombers can't touch that."
December 11th. The stable frame received its finishing touches.
Hans attached a roof fashioned from scraps that resembled rough-hewn beams,
creating the impression of a structure built by poor people in a desperate place. Klaus Richter added straw, actual straw from the camp barn where the Americans kept horses.
He layered it on the floor of the stable,
around the manger Hans had carved to hold the plaster infant Jesus. "Smells right," Klaus said. "Manure and straw. That's what the real stable would have smelled like. Kings born in palaces smell like perfume.
Kings born to save the world smell like shit and hay."
December 12th, 13th. Assembly began.
Hans and his team positioned figures carefully.
Mary and Joseph closest to the manger, the angel towering above them, shepherds approaching from one side, wise men from another, animals scattered throughout.
They used wire to secure figures to wooden bases, ensuring stability.
Ernst Keller added final details. Small pebbles arranged around the stable entrance, moss gathered from trees near the barracks, tiny wooden tools Hans carved to place in Joseph's carpenter shop. December 14th. Final painting.
Franz Becker added shadows,
highlights, details that brought figures to life. Mary's robe, deep blue mixed from indigo-tinted clay. Joseph's cloak, earth brown with gold trim. The angel's wings, silver white that seemed to glow in lamplight.
By midnight, December 14th,
the nativity scene was complete. 6 feet tall, 4 feet wide, 20 figures arranged in a stable built from scrap lumber by 12 German prisoners of war in Texas. Hans stood back, studying his work.
"It's not perfect."
Friedrich Müller disagreed. "It's perfect because it's not perfect. We built this from garbage and grief."
That's more honest than anything carved from expensive materials by men who've never suffered.
Week 3, December 15th through 24, 1944. The final week involved secrecy.
Word had spread through Camp Hearne.
Germans in Barracks 7 were building something significant. The hardcore Nazis wanted to sabotage it, destroy it as collaboration with the enemy. Murphy doubled guards around the carpentry shop.
On December 19th,
3 Nazi sympathizers attempted to force their way into the shop. American guards stopped them. Murphy placed the perpetrators in isolation. "Your project is under military protection," Murphy told Hans.
"Finish it."
Hans worked obsessively those final days, refining details. Tiny cracks in Joseph's staff to show wear, individual fingers on the Virgin Mary's hands, textures in shepherd cloaks.
His team matched his intensity,
driven by the approaching deadline. December 23rd, they moved the completed nativity scene into Barracks 7. Hans arranged it against the far wall, positioning figures so lamplight would cast dramatic shadows.
He added final touches.
Candles in tin can holders, Willie's metalwork. Greenery Ernst had gathered from nearby woods. The plaster infant Jesus placed carefully in the wooden manger. December 24th, afternoon.
Hans invited Captain Murphy to view the scene that evening.
"Bring your guards, we want to share this." Murphy hesitated. "Are you sure?"
"My men. We're the enemy. Tonight, Hans said quietly, we're just men who miss Christmas at home. December 24th, 1944, 1900 hours. Captain James Murphy stood outside Barracks 7 with 13 American guards. The temperature had dropped to 32 degrees, freezing for Texas, mild for men who'd fought in Germany's winter. Murphy's breath fogged as he knocked. Hans Weber opened the door. "Come in, please." The Americans entered slowly, uncertain. Military protocol demanded distance between captors and captives, but tonight, protocol felt inadequate. The Nativity scene dominated the barracks. 6 feet of craftsmanship arranged against rough wooden walls, illuminated by candles in tin can holders. 20 figures carved from scrap lumber, painted with colors mixed from Texas clay and imagination, assembled by 12 men who'd transformed defeat into beauty. Murphy stopped walking. His throat tightened. The Virgin Mary, a teenage girl carved from oak, face painted with expressions beyond words, fear, wonder, acceptance. Her wooden hands cradled empty space where the infant Jesus would rest in his manger. Her eyes looked down at her son with love that transcended language. Joseph, a workman, bent forward, protective, one hand reaching toward his family. His carpenter's tools scattered nearby, small wooden hammers and saws Hans had carved from scraps. A reminder that the King of Kings was born to a father who worked with his hands. The angel, towering above the scene, wings fashioned from tin cans that caught candlelight and threw it back in fractured patterns. The face neither male nor female, neither stern nor gentle, just otherworldly, announcing news too large for human comprehension. 3 wise men bearing gifts, crowns cut from tin cans, robes painted in colors that shimmered. Not conquering kings, but seekers following a star towards something they didn't fully understand. 4 shepherds, rough men carved from cheap pine, faces weathered by outdoor labor. They approached the stable with awe, the first witnesses to glory revealed to the lowliest. Animals, oxen, donkeys, a lamb, creatures who witnessed divinity without understanding, offering only their warmth. The stable itself, rough-hewn lumber, straw scattered on the floor, a sense of poverty and urgency. Not a palace, not a temple. A structure built by desperate people in a forgotten corner of empire. And in the center, in a wooden manger carved from a single piece of oak, the plaster infant Jesus, 8 inches long, wrapped in cloth cut from prison rags. Captain Murphy felt tears streaming down his face before he realized he was crying. Beside him, Sergeant Robert Hayes, who'd fought from Normandy to the German border, who'd buried friends in French mud, who'd shot enemy soldiers at ranges close enough to see their faces, stood with his hand covering his mouth, shoulders shaking. Private Daniel Morrison, 19 years old from Iowa, dropped to his knees. Lieutenant Thomas Chen, who never showed emotion, removed his cap and held it to his chest. 14 American guards stood in a German prisoner barracks in Texas, crying at a nativity scene built from garbage by enemies who'd become something else in that moment. Fellow humans acknowledging that beauty and hope survive even in places designed to contain defeat. Hans Weber watched the Americans cry. He'd expected respect, maybe appreciation. Not this. Not grown men breaking down because 12 Germans had reminded them why Christmas mattered. Finally, Murphy found his voice. "Hans, this is—" He couldn't finish. Words failed. December 24th, 2100 hours. The Americans stayed for 2 hours. Murphy brought coffee from the mess hall. Hot, American coffee. Better than anything Germans had tasted since the war started. The prisoners shared what little they had. Chocolate from Red Cross packages. Cigarettes traded for work details. They sat together in Barracks 7, Americans and Germans, captors and captives, Enemies separated by uniform and language, but united by the nativity scene that reminded them they were human. Murphy asked questions in broken German. Hans answered in broken English. They communicated more through gestures and shared understanding than words. "My daughter," Hans explained, showing his photograph. "She's 7 now. In Bavaria, families gather on Christmas Eve. We light candles around the nativity scene and sing Stille Nacht before midnight mass." Murphy pulled out his own photograph, wife and 2 sons in Pennsylvania. "We do the same thing. Well, we call it Silent Night, same song." They sang together, Americans and Germans, in different languages, the same ancient melody filling the barracks. Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. Silent Night, Holy Night. Friedrich Müller's voice cracked on the second verse. Ernst Keller cried openly. Willy Hoffman, who'd built halos for angels, sang for his dead daughter. When they finished, Murphy stood. "Tomorrow, Christmas Day, I'm arranging for all POWs to see this. Not just Germans, everyone in camp, guards too. This," he gestured at the nativity scene, "this is bigger than war." Hans shook his hand. "Thank you, Captain." "No, thank you." Murphy's voice steadied. "You reminded us why we're fighting, not for territory or politics, for the possibility that men can still build beautiful things when everything tells them to destroy." The Americans left at midnight. They walked back to their quarters in silence, processing what they'd witnessed. Enemies who'd created something that transcended enmity. The next morning, December 25, 1944, Captain Murphy opened Barracks 7 to the entire camp. Hundreds of prisoners, German, Italian, even a few Japanese, filed through to see the nativity scene built from scrap lumber and tin cans and the determination of 12 men who refused to let captivity define them. The hardcore Nazis boycotted it. They called Hans a collaborator, a traitor, weak. They threatened him after the war. Hans didn't care. He'd built something his daughter would have loved. He'd given 12 men purpose for 3 weeks. He'd reminded American guards that Germans were human beings, not just enemies. The nativity scene remained in Barracks 7 through January 1945, when Camp Hearne administration carefully disassembled it and shipped it to the camp museum. Hans never saw it again after the war. Hans Weber repatriated to Germany, May 1946. He found his wife and daughter alive in Oberammergau. Their village had been spared the worst bombing. He never spoke about the war, but he built nativity scenes every Christmas until he died in 1982 at age 71. His daughter Greta kept the tradition, teaching her own children to carve figures from wood. Willy Hoffman returned to Essen, 1946, discovered his entire family dead except one cousin. He worked as a metal worker, rebuilt his life, never remarried. He died alone in 1979, but his apartment contained hundreds of tin can halos he'd crafted over 30 years. His cousin donated them to a local church. Friedrich Müller returned to Munich, resumed teaching art. He never painted propaganda again. His post-war work focused on nativity scenes and religious figures. He taught until 1972, emphasizing to students that art should reveal human dignity, not political ideology. Died, 1985, age 78. Ernst Keller, youngest of the group, returned to Germany, finished university, became an engineer. He carved wooden nativity scenes for his children and grandchildren, always including the lamb he'd made in Texas. Died, 2003, age 79, having never forgotten the Christmas when 12 prisoners built beauty from garbage. Captain James Murphy returned to Pennsylvania, resumed teaching history. He spoke about Camp Hearne in classes, showing photographs of the nativity scene. His students learned that enemies are humans first, political category second. Murphy died in 1988, requesting that his family donate his photographs of the nativity scene to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. The nativity scene itself. Camp Hearne closed in 1946. The nativity scene was placed in storage, then forgotten. In 1982, a local historian discovered it in a warehouse. The figures had deteriorated, paint faded, wood cracked, but the craftsmanship remained evident. The scene was restored and placed in the Camp Hearne Museum in Texas, where it remains today. A plaque reads, "Created December 1944 by German prisoners of war using scrap materials." This nativity scene reminds us that human creativity and hope survive even in captivity. When enemies create beauty together, they remember they're human. Visitors report that the Virgin Mary's face still looks remarkably lifelike, that the angel's tin can wings still catch light, that Joseph's wooden hands still reach protectively toward his family. And every Christmas Eve, the museum lights candles in the tin can holders Willie Hoffman fashioned from garbage in a Texas prison camp 80 years ago. December 24th, 1944. 12 German prisoners transformed scrap lumber, tin cans, and wire into a 6-foot nativity scene that made American guards cry. They built it in 3 weeks, working after lights out, driven by the need to create something beautiful in a place designed to contain defeated enemies. What Hans Weber and his team proved that Christmas wasn't about patriotism or politics or which side deserved victory. It was simpler and more profound. Humans can build bridges across the deepest divisions when they remember their shared humanity. 20 figures carved from garbage. 14 American guards crying at the feet of enemies. One night when captors and captives sang Silent Night together in different languages, united by the same ancient melody. If this story moved you, share it. Comment where you're watching from and what Christmas means to you. Subscribe for more forgotten stories of humanity in wartime. Merry Christmas! From enemies who became brothers for one night in Texas.